Lecture: The Trials and Triumphs of Progressivism. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we turn to Chapter 3, The Trials and Triumphs of Progressivism. If Chapter 2 introduced the spirit of reform and Theodore Roosevelt's square deal, Chapter 3 shows us how that reform movement matured, expanded, and faced new challenges in the years before World War I, expanding reform beyond Roosevelt. Although Theodore Roosevelt set the tone, progressivism was not confined to him. Across the nation, governors, mayors, and reform-minded citizens were pushing for change. State houses experimented with new regulations, cities launched public service programs, and reformers sought to expand democracy and curb corruption. But progressivism also faced opposition. Business leaders, political machines, and conservative courts often resisted. Progressives discovered that triumph required not just energy and idealism, but also compromise, persistence, and sometimes frustration. William Howard Taft and conservative progressivism. When Theodore Roosevelt left office in 1909, he handpicked William Howard Taft as his successor. Taft was intelligent, honest, and dedicated, but lacked Roosevelt's charisma and flair for leadership. Taft actually filed more antitrust cases than Roosevelt and supported reforms such as the 16th Amendment, establishing the federal income tax, and the 17th Amendment, direct election of senators. Yet he disappointed progressives by siding with conservatives on tariff reform and natural resource policy. His cautious style made him appear more an administrator than a crusader. This division between Roosevelt and Taft eventually split the Republican Party and opened the way for new political realignments. The election of 1912. By 1912, tensions within the progressive camp came to a head. Roosevelt, dissatisfied with Taft, launched a third-party bid as the candidate of the Progressive Party, often called the Bull Moose Party. His platform called for women's suffrage, stricter corporate regulation, and social welfare programs. The Democrats nominated Woodrow Wilson, a progressive-minded governor of New Jersey, who campaigned on his New Freedom program, emphasizing competition, small business, and limited government rather than Roosevelt's vision of a powerful regulatory state. The election became a dramatic three-way contest. Taft represented the conservative Republicans, Roosevelt the progressive insurgents, and Wilson the Democrats. In the end, the split Republican vote handed victory to Wilson, who became the first Democratic president since Grover Cleveland. Wilson's New Freedom in action. Wilson's presidency demonstrated that progressivism was not just a Republican project. His administration enacted significant reforms. Underwood Tariff, 1913, lowered tariffs and introduced a graduated income tax. Federal Reserve Act, 1913, created a central banking system to regulate credit and stabilize the economy. Clayton Antitrust Act, 1914, strengthened earlier antitrust laws and exempted labor unions from prosecution. Federal Trade Commission, 1914, established to prevent unfair business practices. Wilson initially resisted social welfare measures, but under pressure he signed laws on child labor and workers' compensation. His reforms extended the progressive legacy into new territory. Social reform and cultural change beyond Washington, progressivism reshaped American society. Women's movement. The campaign for women's suffrage gained momentum. Groups like the National American Woman Suffrage Association, NAWSA, pressed for the vote state by state, while more militant activists like Alice Paul demanded a federal amendment. Labor reforms. Progressives campaigned for better working conditions, shorter hours, and protections for women and children. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire of 1911 dramatized the urgent need for safety laws. Prohibition movement. Reformers pushed to eliminate alcohol, believing it caused poverty and moral decay. By 1919, the 18th Amendment would enshrine prohibition nationwide. Education and public health. John Dewey's ideas of progressive education emphasized creativity and democracy in the classroom. Reformers also promoted public health initiatives to combat disease in crowded cities. The limits of progressivism. For all its triumphs, progressivism had sharp limitations. Racial injustice remained largely ignored. Wilson himself was a Southerner who tolerated segregation in federal offices and defended racist policies. African American leaders like W.E.B. Du Bois pressed for civil rights through the NAACP, but progressives rarely made racial equality a priority. Immigrants, too, often found progressivism more controlling than liberating, as reformers tried to Americanize them rather than respect their cultural traditions. Conclusion: triumphs mixed with trials. The progressive era achieved remarkable reforms in government, business, labor, and society. It showed that Americans could use democratic institutions to address the problems of industrialization and urbanization, yet it also revealed the limits of reform in a nation still deeply divided by race, class, and culture. By the eve of World War I, progressivism had transformed the political and social landscape, but it had not solved every problem. The trials of reform would continue into the next decades, but the triumphs of progressivism permanently altered the role of government and the expectations of citizens. Closing thought, Progressivism asked a daring question: can democracy adapt to modern industrial life? The answer, at least in part, was yes, but only through constant struggle, compromise, and renewal.